I don't remember how it happened. Just flashes, a confusion of lights and sounds, the deafening noise of metal twisting, and the sensation of being pulled out of my own body. When I finally opened my eyes, I was lying in a hospital bed. The environment was white, sterile, and the smell of disinfectant filled my nostrils. I looked around, trying to understand where I was and why I was there, but my mind felt like a blank book. I couldn't remember anything, not even my own name. A nurse entered the room, noticing that I was awake. She smiled reassuringly, but I felt a growing panic in my chest. "You're awake. That's good," she said. "You had an accident, but you're safe now. Your parents are on their way." Parents? The word echoed in my mind. I had parents? Why couldn't I remember them? A strange and uncomfortable feeling took hold of me. Minutes later, the door opened again and a couple entered. They looked relieved, their faces marked by concern. "Thank God you're okay, daughter." The woman rushed to my bed and held my hand. The man stayed a little further back, but also seemed emotional. I didn't know how to respond. These people were strangers to me, and despite their warm reception, something deep inside me told me that something was wrong. There was a coldness in their eyes that didn't match the warmth of their words.
"You don't need to worry about anything now. We'll take you home, and everything will be fine,"
the man said. I smiled hesitantly, trying to find some trace of memory or feeling of familiarity, but all I felt was a growing void and an unsettling distrust. Something inside me said that these people, despite their comforting words, were not who they claimed to be. The first days at home were a blur of frustration and confusion. The house was large and isolated, surrounded by a dense forest that separated it from the rest of the world. It was cozy, with old furniture and a fireplace that always seemed lit, but nothing there felt familiar to me. Every corner, every object, everything was strange. My parents, or at least the people who claimed to be my parents, tried to calm me down. My mother always had a comforting smile on her face and brought me hot tea, while my father assured me that everything would be fine, that my memory would return with time. The doctor said it's normal. You just need to rest and take your medication. Soon, all of this will be just a bad memory, he repeated, as if trying to convince himself. But as time passed, I felt more and more trapped. Nothing triggered any memories in me, and the frustration grew each day. My parents did everything to keep me comfortable, but there were restrictions. I could only walk around the house and the backyard, never beyond that. It's still too early to go wandering around. You need to fully recover, my mother would say. At night, the sense of strangeness intensified. I heard whispers coming from my parents' room, muffled conversations that abruptly ended when I approached. When I asked about it, they would just smile and change the subject. The distrust I felt in the hospital now grew every day, fueled by these secrets and the constant control they exerted over me. I wanted to remember. I wanted my memory to return so I could make sense of all this. But for now, all I had was a house full of strangers and a crushing void where my memories should have been. As days passed, my distrust towards my parents only grew. Small details, things that didn't add up, began to accumulate. The way they avoided certain questions, how they always had a ready excuse for anything out of the ordinary. Sometimes I caught quick glances between them, as if they were sharing a secret I couldn't know. One night, while lying in bed trying to sleep, I heard whispers coming from their room. I quietly got up and approached the door, pressing my ear against it to listen more closely.
"She can't find out,"
my father said urgently. "If she remembers anything, we're done for," replied my mother. My heart raced. What were they hiding from me? Why were they so concerned about my memories? Something was definitely wrong, and I needed to find out what it was. The next day, while they were distracted, I started to explore the house more carefully. That's when I noticed something odd in the pantry. One shelf seemed deeper than the others. Curious, I pushed it hard, and to my surprise, it moved, revealing a small key hanging on the wall behind it. The key was old, rusted with time, but clearly important. I recalled a locked warehouse in the backyard, a place my parents had explicitly forbidden me from going near. That night, I decided I would investigate. I waited until they were asleep. With the key in hand, I silently slid through the house, each step echoing in my head. I unlocked the back door and made my way to the warehouse. My heart pounded so fast I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. The key fit perfectly into the rusty lock. I turned it with difficulty, hearing the mechanism click open. I took a deep breath and pushed the door, which creaked open ominously. The smell of decay hit me immediately, nearly making me recoil. But I needed to know. Inside, in the faint moonlight seeping through the boards, I saw 2 decomposed bodies. Shock and horror overwhelmed me. The stench of decay was unbearable, a putrid mix that made me gag and cover my nose. Trembling, I forced myself to look closer at the bodies. They were unrecognizable, but something inside me knew these were my real parents. The horror of realization hit me like a punch to the gut, and a scream escaped my lips before I could stop myself. Suddenly, I heard hurried footsteps behind me. My parents, or rather, my kidnappers, were coming towards me, alarmed by my scream. Without thinking twice, I bolted out of the warehouse, my heart pounding frantically. They shouted after me, their voices filled with anger and desperation. "Come back here." My mother's voice was seething with a fury I had never heard before. Adrenaline surged through me. I ran through the backyard, my legs moving faster than I ever thought possible. But they were fast too, and with each step, I felt them closing in. There was no time to think, only to act. I saw the forest ahead and ran towards it, knowing it was my only chance. Branches and bushes scratched me, but I didn't stop. I could hear their footsteps behind me, getting closer and closer. My legs were starting to ache, and exhaustion was creeping in, but the will to survive was stronger. I had to escape, had to find help. The forest seemed endless, but finally I spotted a road ahead. I sprinted towards it, my lungs burning with effort. When I reached the asphalt, I saw lights in the distance, an open diner. With my last strength, I ran inside, breathless and desperate. The attendant looked at me with surprise and concern. "Please help me," I managed to say between gasps. "They're coming after me." He quickly grabbed the phone and called the police. I collapsed into a chair, feeling the safety of the walls around me, but knowing the danger was still out there. It didn't take long for the police to arrive. I was safe, but the horrifying truth of what had happened still haunted my thoughts. Sitting in the diner, surrounded by police and the muffled sound of sirens, I finally allowed myself to breathe. I still trembled, adrenaline still coursing through my body, but at least I was away from immediate danger. The police asked me questions, and I answered as best as I could, despite the chaos in my mind. The journey back home was silent. The police, guns drawn, searched every room, but my kidnappers had already vanished. The house was empty, except for the bodies in the warehouse, confirming my worst fears. Those were my real parents. The people who had cared for me since waking up in the hospital were imposters, liars who had torn me away from my real life. Investigations began immediately. I was taken to a safe location while the police tried to piece together the puzzle. Questions about my life before the accident, about how they managed to kidnap me, all remained without clear answers. All I knew was that I had been deceived, manipulated, and that the monsters posing as my parents were still out there, somewhere. Days turned into weeks, and despite the police's efforts, the kidnappers were never found. It was as if they had vanished without a trace. With each passing day, the hope of seeing them caught dwindled, and the reality that they could be free, ready to do the same to someone else, haunted my thoughts. I was placed under the care of a temporary foster family while investigations continued. They were kind and did their best to help me overcome the trauma, but the fear persisted. At night, nightmares came, bringing back memories of that warehouse, the smell of decay, and the sound of footsteps behind me as I ran for my life. Life moved on, but I could never shake the feeling of being watched. Every stranger I saw, every moving shadow, reminded me of them. The horrifying truth of my experience never left me, and the absence of justice only reinforced the terror within me. I know I'll never be completely free as long as they're on the loose, but I promised myself I wouldn't let fear control me. I would keep fighting, living, and hoping that one day they would be found and made to pay for their crimes. Until then, I clung to hope and the strength that kept me alive on that terrible night.